Hello and welcome to SyrupCast episode 34 on this
Woo!
beautiful March. What day is it today? I don't even know
It's
what day it is
Friday.
today.
That's because you in
Friday?
Spain time where nobody cares what day it is.
Exactly. Every day is a weekend
Every
when you're
day is
eating
siesta.
jambon. It is March 6th. It is SyrupCast 34, and I'm joined by the lovely Jane McIntyre. How are you?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm
Are you
still
jet lagged?
recovering. I'm actually not so jet lagged today, but I have to tell you the amount of coffee I imbibed while in Spain is ridiculous. It should have killed me, but in fact, it only made me stronger.
Ooh. Okay.
So, this podcast is going to focus almost entirely on
What you did while you
that.
had that coffee.
We're going to talk about the Galaxy S6, the S6 Edge. We're going to talk about the HTC One M9, the Alcatel One Touch Idle 3, which is kind of cool. And it's less important but super interesting deal with Cyanogen. We're going to talk a little bit about the Apple Watch event coming up on Monday, which I'm going to be at, which I'm really excited about. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about today's results of the Spectrum auction, where Wind won basically everything that it bid on in Southern Ontario, British Columbia, and Alberta. And
Yay.
I spoke to Tony Lacavera, Wind's chairman, earlier, and we had a really interesting conversation, so we'll get to that in a bit. But first, I want to get a feeling from this side of the pond. What did you think just seeing all that coverage? That it's kind of like a barf of coverage, right? When there's an
Yeah.
embargo, everybody puts out all their stuff at once. I had a bit of time to work with on the HTC One M9, so I had about a day with it. So I got a good sense of it. But
Oh yeah?
yeah, and it was
Did
actually
they
a
like give
really
it to you and then release you into Barcelona with it, or did they just
they
keep
did
you under
with
their watchful eye?
no they so this is a really cool program that they have where they'll give a bunch of journalists full disclosure, HTC paid for my flight, and they were very gracious enough to host me at a hotel, and they did this for a number of journalists, to give them a sense of how the device works and to spend a little bit of time with it under NDA before the embargo lifts. And this is a way of them getting not better coverage but better quality coverage.
It's
And
also
I think
better
it
access
works.
too, right? Because if they flew you out a couple days before, like the mass of journalists descended upon Barcelona. So like if you had flown in on the same time as everyone else, then you wouldn't have had time to meet with HTC in that capacity.
Right. So
So
this is their strategy. They want more comprehensive coverage than their competitors. And you know, as writers on this stuff, it's incumbent on us to try and get as much access as early as possible. And when a company like HTC makes it easier, then everybody benefits, because then it's not a rushed hands-on the way that
right.
most of these press events are.
Yeah, and
So
it's also beneficial in the sense that your first reaction to a feature might be like, "Oh, that's kind of stupid." Like those themes, like you keep talking about how the themes are great, and I haven't played with the phone, so I'm like, I don't get it. Isn't it just like wallpapers and icons and fonts? So that's yeah, it gives you a better idea of what you're looking at, especially for features like that where they've obviously put a lot of time into it and they want you to understand.
yeah,
So
exactly. And they have product managers, they have designers on hand to talk to us. Obviously they're trying to convey a certain message, and you can take it as gospel or be skeptical as you would with any other message. But the fact that you have time to digest whatever these people are saying, you get time with the device itself, you get to do comparisons with the hardware and the software. It wasn't finished software, so as I said in my hands-on video, I had some issues with the camera quality, but they've since sent us an email saying that many of those issues, such as autofocus problems and white balance problems, those will be cleared up before the device ships by the end of March. Hopefully that's true. But a hands-on is not a review, and that's what I think everybody needs to remember.
right.
These are very, very early, pieces of content, right? They're early for the manufacturer. They're early for us as the creator, and they should not be taken as any indication of how the device will act
Yeah.
when it ships. but it is a really good opportunity for most people who wouldn't otherwise get their hands on stuff. So um, that being said, the the Sunday, like Sunday Fun Day is when all of these companies have their press conferences. HTC, Huawei, Alcatel, and Samsung all had press conferences on the Sunday before the day MWC actually began. Not to mention the fact that there is the Barcelona equivalent of Pepcom and Showstoppers all in one day. So unless you have a team of like 8 people, you can't do any of these things or all of them. I got a chance to go to HTC and Samsung, and I got pre-briefed on Alcatel.
Did you get a chance to go to Showstoppers?
No, I didn't. And I heard that they're different than the CES equivalent.
It is. It's like a lot of the focus is on like ham and sangria. And then there's a lot of like, I guess, like mobile infrastructure stuff and then accessories. I don't know what there was there this year, but that was what was there last year.
Yeah, I can imagine it's the same. The mobile infrastructure side of things is really interesting because that's what you don't. I like it. I think it's super. As a network geek, I'm fascinated by how these kinds of backhauls are created. The way that companies like our carriers have to enter into contracts with the solutions providers like Huawei and Nokia, NTN, their network systems side of their business, and there's a lot of back and forth. I mean, once you commit to a company, it's really hard to back out. So a lot of the carriers take their time. They weigh the pros and cons of working with each company, and it's one of those things where a lot of money exchanges hands that you never hear about. Nokia is still a huge player in the network infrastructure business, and it's one of those things where, so Nokia sold its devices and services division to Microsoft. They must be dying.
Yeah, they cut off basically like a pinky finger.
Well, I mean, they cut off basically 4 fingers of their right hand. It's a bit more than the pinky, but I mean they needed it, right? Those 4 fingers had gangrene. They needed to get rid of that. So Nokia is actually an interesting. If we have time, we'll talk a little bit about the N1 tablet because I actually really liked it. The iPad clone.
I feel like you weren't the only one either. I feel like a lot of people liked it.
No, it was so interesting. I played with it right before I left for to go home. So I was only there until Wednesday evening or Tuesday evening. So I was only at the conference for 2 days, and then I had a flight to catch at 5 a.m. the next morning. So the N1 was the last piece of content that I captured, and I wrote the article, did the video, and then I looked at other sites' coverage of it, and it was equally as positive as mine. And I had no context because I'd never read anything else about the tablet before. And then I saw The Verge, Engadget, Ars Technica. They all praised it for being an honest clone. Even the people who represented it.
That's something that people, I think, also, there's like a lot, when you were talking about Nokia has so much going on aside from their devices and services. It's also important to remember that they mainly, like, the biggest thing that they sold was the Lumia brand. Like, Nokia is allowed to still produce hardware, first of all. And second of all, they're allowed to, I think there's like a limitation of like 1 to 2 years, depending on whether it's smartphones or tablets. And after that's up, they're actually allowed to like produce, was it smartphones in 2 years and tablets in 1 or something?
I think it was, so feature phones they sold to Microsoft as well. And that's still that was their biggest business by far.
Right.
They were, even at the time of selling to Microsoft, shipping, I think, about over 100 million feature phones still.
Yeah.
Those Nokia 100s, $35 devices. Yeah. So Microsoft is now, that they own that. I'd have to check how long Nokia has to stay out of the game.
12 to 18 months, or tablets in 12 to 18 months, but smartphones not for 2 years. But then after that, they're allowed.
Yeah,
they could
absolutely.
They could sell a Nokia device with Android if they wanted to.
So,
because all they did with this tablet was they licensed the Nokia brand, right, to an OEM.
Right. So, and that's another interesting thing is that the N1 is actually as much a Foxconn product as it is a Nokia product. It was designed by
Yeah.
Foxconn, it was built by Foxconn, and the only thing that is being maintained by Nokia is the launcher, I believe. Even Foxconn is undertaking to update the software
Hmm.
using the Nokia brand. So there, it's interesting how hands-off Nokia is being. It's a similar, but not. It's a similar, but sort of more overtly ODM type deal than BlackBerry's deal with Foxconn, because BlackBerry only uses them to design and build certain handsets, but Foxconn, from what I understand, designed the Z3 and then also manufactured it, but software was entirely undertaken by BlackBerry, as they have to, obviously.
What do you mean by
So,
Nokia?
did I say
BlackBerry, I think.
BlackBerry?
Yeah. But
Yeah.
that's also a
Sorry,
cool
I was
fact
talking.
too,
I was talking
though.
about the Z3,
Yeah.
like the BlackBerry
Oh, okay.
Z3.
But that's cool too, though,
It's
because
similar.
I don't know if it was, I don't know what it was like in North America, but definitely in Europe, 10 years ago, Huawei was seen as like was similar to Foxconn, where it's like they made equipment. They didn't make your phones. They made equipment, and now
Yeah.
they're in a big way have entered the phone business. So it's interesting that this is being branded as like a Foxconn product too. And
Hmm.
maybe that's because Nokia wants to distance itself as much as possible, where it's like, hey, we just gave them the name, they copied the iPad, and it's not our fault. But
They're owning
it could
it.
be
I
it could be
know.
something else too. You never know.
I spoke to product managers at the Nokia booth, and they were very happy to admit that it was an iPad clone, if only because they claim that nobody else in the Android ecosystem is doing iPad-like experiences, where nobody in the Android world is making a high-quality metal tablet at 7.9 inches with a high quality 2048 by 1536 display with a laminated IPS LCD panel with a high-end 64-bit Intel chip. I mean, from what I could tell, they're very happy to be compared to the iPad because it's only
That's what
different
they are
in
going for.
the area. Exactly, it's only different in the area that they need it to be different, which is in the sense that it runs Android.
But doesn't Apple like isn't that going to be an issue with Apple? All Apple's patents that they have on the most random things. Like Apple has a patent on rectangular devices with rounded corners, and like no joke, the drawing looks like an iPad,
Right.
and they're like this we have this now. So I don't understand how a device like this could not be in contravention of that. I mean, it's a
Well, I think that may
patent,
be
but
a roadblock to its release in North America. The reason they're right now the N1 is only actually shipping in China, and it's
hmm,
shipping without the Play Store, and it could be that Nokia is trying to avoid any litigation from Apple by releasing it only in a market that Apple really doesn't have any power over its copyright. I don't know. I mean,
it also
obviously that.
helps
Yeah,
that that market is also crazy for knockoffs.
right, and Apple's never been able to do anything about it. So,
Yeah.
from what I understand, Apple can't sue Foxconn. I mean, Foxconn creates the iPhone. They build the iPhone
I think
for
that's
Apple.
going to damage their relationship, though.
I
Wasn't there
don't
a case
know.
a few years back where Foxconn was making like a very iPhone-like? Maybe I'm making this up. I seem to remember that they were making a phone that was like the iPhone, and Apple essentially like
Shut
put
her
the boot
down.
down and was like, hey, let's do that, or we're not coming over anymore.
I think Apple needs Foxconn just as much as Foxconn needs Apple, at least at this
Mm.
point. Although we did hear that Japan Display, not that Foxconn builds displays, but Japan Display is rumored to be spending $1.4 billion building a facility to create screens just for Apple. Oh, did I lose you?
Insane. No, I'm here.
Oh, yeah. So speaking of ODMs, let's talk a little bit about HTC because um, they talked a lot about the M9 as the sort of maturity of its HTC 3.0 strategy. The first being a smartphone ODM building devices for other companies. The second being sort of a high-end Android manufacturer that focused exclusively on devices, and the third being this sort of multifaceted device slash accessory slash ecosystem facilitator. So They have their rebrand.
Yeah.
They just unveiled the Grip, which is their first fitness tracker. They have the Revive, and they don't want you using before the words, but the branding is such that it looks like there's the re before everything. So the CMO, Idris Muti, and the product manager behind the Grip and the other re products, the connected devices division, are in are actually actively conflicting over how they should brand these products, which is super interesting to me because you're seeing an internal battle happen in real time where Idris Muti, the guy who they actually hired from Design Couture, who is and he lived in Toronto for a while. He ran the Toronto division of this huge design firm. He wants it to be everything because it's a united brand. So
Right.
Revive, and
Re-camera,
the
re-grip.
initial name for the grip was Active. So it was going to be
Oh,
the
that's
HTC
cool.
Active, but there were too many legal issues to get that pushed because there were other devices that had the word active in them, so they couldn't
Couldn't they just make the
copyright the
re
name.
really small and then have it as like the reactive?
Well, that's the thing is that you get into a problem where the word inserting the preface or prefix re before everything changes the definition of the word. So, the reactive that could be misconstrued as they're reacting to the market, right? They're slowly um, they're taking their time and they're not a proactive but they're a reactive company. People
Yeah.
could take that the wrong way, which is true. I mean, it's kind
Yeah.
of a dangerous game
Well,
that they're
they should have
playing.
thought about all of this before they launched the re camera.
Right, but that's another thing is that it's not called the re camera, it's just called the re. Like it's a lowercase
Yeah, but when
camera
people
in the
say,
sense
"Oh, like the re camera," like
I know it's ridiculous. They have
it's like the way in 2007 it was like it was the Apple phone. Like it wasn't like I don't know. It's like I
well, I
don't know.
mean, like I mean, they're going to have a problem with the Apple Watch, right? Because is it the Apple Watch? Is it Apple's launching the Apple Watch, or is it Apple is launching the watch?
Yeah, and that's
I
I
mean,
have that issue too. Is all the Apple Watch articles I write, I I'm really conscious of when I say like, oh, like the watch will have like this kind of battery, and I'm like, well, I'm not referring to like the brand. I'm referring to like the watch as in like the watch as in
right,
like the shoe, the boot, the whatever. So I'm
right.
always like reading over and like moving my capitalization around based on like what I'm talking about.
Yeah, exactly. It's a regular noun versus a proper noun, and it's a problem that a lot of these companies are having when they brand words, regular used words. Like, so Apple, I mean, even Apple wouldn't be able to trademark the word watch, right?
Mm.
You can't trademark a regularly used word like watch or shoe, but you can trademark Apple Watch. So clearly it is, and they will emphasize that they want us to use the words Apple Watch together, capitalized, as the product name. So Apple launches Apple Watch, you know, just like Apple launches iPhone 6 or whatever. Apple Watch is the full name of the brand. I had a problem with that. I had a similar problem today where I was writing about Visa checkout, and one of the PR people I'd written Visa launched Visa launched checkout last year, and I actually got a PR person calling me saying, "Do you mind updating that to say Visa launched Visa checkout last year because checkout on its own
It's
is
not the
not
brand.
is not the
Yeah,
product.
I
It's
know at Tom
Visa
Carter
checkout."
we had a similar policy, but you couldn't say like iPhone 5 and 5C. You had to say iPhone 5 and iPhone 5C because 5C is not the name of the product.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But that's more of a list, right? You could say iPhones 5S and 5C,
Yeah, you could.
but that's again like a lot of
This
semantic
is our job,
issues.
people. This is what we go through for you. The anguish that we go through.
And also now we have so many other companies just copying Apple and adding watch, right? So we
Huawei
have
Watch.
Huawei Watch and Alcatel Watch, um, and then there's even more troubling ones like LG's Watch Urbane, right? So do you call it LG Watch Urbane or just Watch Urbane, or do you call it the Urbane for short? Like, can you get away with just calling it the Urbane or the Urbane
We had this,
LTE?
yeah, we there's a similar problem that was encountered with the Apple TV. So it's the same issue,
Ah, yeah,
but
true
that was
story.
a long time ago.
Well, I'm sure we could talk about this for a while,
I'm
but
sure we'll get over it, guys. Don't
people
panic.
probably don't want to hear about our linguistic and literary,
Strife.
semantic issues. If
Anyway, so how about that HTC One M9?
so, anyway, I got to try it for a couple of days, and I like it. I think it's a big improvement over the One M8. Notably, the screen is actually significantly improved, and that surprised me because on paper there's no difference, but they've upgraded the panel quality. Um, it's the same resolution, 1080p. It's the same size, 5-inch. It's the same technology underlying Super LCD 3, but somehow they've improved the quality of the panel. It's not quite as blue. It's not quite as what was it? I should go back to my notes. It's actually more color accurate. So the whites aren't as gray, they're more blue. Yeah, that's what it was. So it's a lot more blue, it's a lot more cool. So it looks a little bit more like a traditional LCD panel and not like an AMOLED panel.
Right.
Pairing the two, you could tell that there were significant improvements in calibration. Though it could have just been my panel, but we all agreed in our group
Did
that it was a big
HTC talk to you
upgrade.
about that at all, or is that just something that you noticed?
No, they mentioned it offhand. They didn't say that this was one of their messages that they're pushing, that it's an upgraded display. Obviously, the main message was HTC Sense 7 and whatever that entails, contextual upgrades. It knows where you are. It knows what you're doing, so it can offer you suggested apps. It can offer you suggested restaurants through Blink Feed. There's some ethical issues there with the suggested apps. They're not monetizing it yet, but eventually they may be pushing apps that developers pay them to push on your home screen through a widget. Not a big fan of that.
No.
But you could obviously turn it off if you don't want it. You can turn the entire widget off. You can't turn off the suggested apps. So
that's annoying.
You lose the entire feature
Yeah.
if you don't want that particular thing.
I don't like that.
But really, the camera is the biggest thing here. The camera and the new build, the manufacturing process. So it uses dual anodization, which I explained in the video, is a way of producing two separate colors and textures from a single piece of metal.
Is it pretty?
It's beautiful. It looks like an inlaid. It almost looks like an inlaid piece of jewelry, where you have an outer shell or an inner shell inlaid with sort of an outer frame. So if you look at the photos, it looks like two separate pieces of aluminum stuck together, but it's actually not. Unlike the HTC One M7, which did have pieces of aluminum basically glued together, and you could tell because there were gaps between them on the back and front plate. This only, they say that it takes 300 minutes to produce a single frame, and that only 5% of the aluminum block is left once the procedure is done. So they're basically using an entire block of aluminum, and there's no waste. So it's quite incredible. And when you feel it, one of the biggest complaints about the M8 was that it was slippery because the sides were really, the back was actually quite glossy.
Yeah.
And as you said, you dropped yours all the time.
And it's because it's also the design. It's so narrow. It's really thin, and it's a narrow phone.
So what they did was they basically added back those edges from the M7, but they did it a different way. They did it with a different manufacturing process.
Okay.
But they added back that grippiness, but they also made it slightly shorter, so it doesn't feel like you're holding a 16:9 tablet anymore.
Yeah.
It's a little bit thicker, but that's to accommodate a larger battery, 2840 milliamp battery, And the 20 megapixel camera is really what it comes down to, right? They're taking
And
the
you didn't.
ultra pixel,
Okay.
flipping it, and then you have this 20 megapixel camera where you can do basically everything you could do on another Android phone. So
But
I
you
don't
said
know.
that the software isn't final, so the pictures were not great. Like that was the biggest problem. Like I don't. If they could just give me the M8 again, I could chalk the fact that I drop it all the time down to the fact that I'm clumsy. But if they could give me that with a better camera, I would be totally happy.
Yeah, so I think what they really did, they went through they went through a categorized list of complaints about the M8, and they just said, okay, checkbox, checkbox, checkbox. Um, and I think they got it. You know, the blink feed's been made less stupid. The camera's been upgraded, though I think they erred on the wrong side. Instead of so here's what I'm allowed to say because I signed an NDA and I can't reveal everything that we talked about in the session, but they're not entirely done with UltraPixel, and they are going to try to find a way to bring a better UltraPixel camera to the back. The problem
Hmm.
is that it's really hard to develop a camera module at a higher megapixel with the same sizes with the same sized individual pixels as the original 4 megapixel sensor.
Okay.
You know, without making the sensor
Yeah.
enormous and super expensive.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So, from what I understand, they told us that it's a Sony sensor, which means it's likely the IMX 220 or 240, the one that's in the Xperia Z3, um,
Which
which is a good lens. I mean,
yeah,
it's a
which
good
sounds like
sensor.
which I love. I love the photos that that phone takes.
The problem is that they didn't keep the aperture at 2.0. They increased it to 2.2 or decreased it, I guess. So it now
Yeah.
lets in less light. And compared to the 16 megapixel f1.9 sensor on the S6, I actually think that HTC is at a huge disadvantage now. You know,
Yeah. Because the camera isn't it the Galaxy S6 is it performs really well in low light. That's what I've heard. I haven't played with it.
it does, and it's actually an amazing camera overall. And what HTC had in the M8 and M7 was a mediocre daylight camera, but a fantastic low light camera.
Yep.
And now they have a mediocre daylight camera and a mediocre low light camera with
Oh.
really with like an insane amount of detail. But the problem is that they don't have a better overall photo taking experience anymore
Right.
than the Xperia Z3 or the Galaxy S6. And the only advantage is that you get all these manual controls to use with all these pixels. So potentially, if they do manage to fix the white balance and the
Yeah.
autofocus problems, and you take advantage of the manual controls, potentially
Yeah,
you'll
but
have.
nobody uses the manual controls. Like they go on and on about how like the best camera is the one that you have with you, and what they mean by that is the one that you can take out and say like, oh my God, look at that squirrel, click. Like it's not like oh like let me hope that it stays long enough. Like this picture, this like framed image that I want to capture remains intact while I fiddle with the settings,
Yep,
which is
absolutely right. And that's the problem is that HTC had no choice. They had to do something about the camera.
they did. It was terrible. I remember in I think it was October. I was standing in Starbucks with Douglas, and I wanted to take a picture of something. I think it was like a cookie or something. And I took out the camera and I turned it on, and the camera app launched, and then it kind of gathered itself as it prepared to let me take the picture, and then everything just went yellow. And it looked amazing once it first opened, but then it accounted for like the artificial light in the cookie cabinet, and it accounted for like the glare on the case, and then it was like, okay, this is what it's going to look like now. And Doug was like, "Ooh, it's like it just said like, how about like how do we make everything prettier? Like just wait a second while we screw it up for you." And I couldn't make it go back to like, yeah, it just everything went yellowy orange, and I was trying to make it go back, and Doug was like, "There has to be a way that you can revert to that." And I was like, "I don't know," and now I don't want to because the moment has passed. Now I'm just like a douchebag standing in front of a Starbucks cabinet trying to take a picture of a cookie for like way too long. So no one's gonna
Yeah.
do that.
And I mean, you don't want to have to mess with sort of framing either. So there's
No.
different ways of establishing exposure. There's
Right.
center weighting. There's
Exactly.
there's spot weighting. There's uh, the third kind of weighting, which I guess takes the entire scene and
Yeah.
tries to establish a white balance and an exposure setting through that.
Yeah.
But you have a problem where these sensors are so small. Um, they have to make the intelligent choice, and that's difficult when you have such little light to work with.
Yeah.
So hopefully HTC figures it out. Um, but I do think that they're moving away from their 1 series, in the sense that I think they're still going to have an annual 1 refresh.
Mhm.
But again and again, they talk about the importance of the Desire series, the fact that the Desire series is really the only series for them making any money, right?
Right. Oh
Um,
yeah, that
and the
makes
1 series is a hero product that they can use to promote HTC as a brand,
sense.
because just the number of devices they sell, even at a higher margin, is so much less than
Right.
they need to break even. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how they manage to fix their problems.
So that's coming out in the end of March, right?
End of March, beginning of April, they'll definitely have it on shelves around the same time as they won't want to be too much later than the S6 if they do
Hmm.
um, come out with it later. The S6 is, as we said, debuting on April 10th.
Yeah.
So what's your impression of the
Of the S6?
S6s? Yeah,
Interesting, because before before MWC, before you left, there was all the rumors about the dual edge screen. First of all, just to kick it back to that conversation about capitalization and grammar, why doesn't the E have a capital E? I don't understand.
oh, that's so frustrating.
It's so annoying. Anyway, that's out there. Okay. The dual edge. I don't know. I wasn't. I had no faith in it. It looks gorgeous. It looks beautiful, but and it does look a lot nicer than the vanilla S6. But I don't know. It's weird. Everybody seems so like anyone who saw it in Barcelona seems really like boner take my money. And I don't know. I didn't expect that, so that's really surprising, which it's intrigued me.
Yeah,
But
I
I
have
don't know
to
what to
admit
make of it.
that the Edge was super impressive.
Yeah.
Um, it does.
Did they
So
decrease the edges? Like it looks like there's less edge than there is in the Note
there
Edge.
is less edge because they had to accommodate the volume and power buttons on the left and right side.
Yeah, you can only innovate to a point, Samsung.
But the one thing that I don't understand about the Edge is, other than the Edge itself, there's literally no advantage to it over the S6. It's not like you're paying any more to get a bigger screen, to get a better camera, the way that they differentiate the iPhone
Yeah.
6
Do
from
you
the
think
6
it almost
Plus.
would have been worth it to just have the Galaxy S6 be the Edge?
Yes, I agree, and I don't understand why they're coming out with 2 models. I think
Because they're still not sure.
right, but that's a
No one sure.
terrible decision because they're
Oh yeah.
splitting sales down the middle, and they're still vacillating between whether they consider the Edge a premium brand or a part of the mainstream Galaxy S, uh,
Mm.
sort of, uh, strategy. Because for like, I understand with the Note Edge in the sense that it was mainly a technology demo, right? They
Yeah, they
didn't
said
build
it
that
was
many
like a
of them.
limited edition concept.
Right, and they didn't want that phone to sell very many because they have supply constraints.
They launched it in like 3 countries.
Exactly, and really they acknowledged that it was just there to show off what they could do with that curved edge display. The
Yeah.
problem is that the S6 has always been the flagship brand for Samsung. Sorry, the S series has always been the flagship brand. So when you come out with 2 phones that are otherwise identical with $100 price difference between them, and
The
really
price
not
is
that many
crazy.
features.
Because the thing is that Samsung has been doing this for years, where they'll put out the S whatever their flagship, and then they'll be like, oh, we have like the S5 Active, and they'll highlight different aspects that you might want. They'll do like a ruggedized version. They'll do like a kind of a version that focuses more on the camera. They'll do a version that's smaller in the mini. But it really is just people like, and you can tell, like, you look at that phone and you don't need you don't need the marketing materials to know why someone will want it. But you look at the Edge and you're like, it's for edgy people. Like, I don't know. I
It's
don't
not for
know.
edgy people. They're both so both of them are so thin, and they're both made of metal, and they both have the same cameras and the same storage sizes and the same screens and the same fingerprint sensor and the same benefits that the benefits over the S5. That's the problem, is that on paper, other than the design, the
They are the same.
S6 and S6 Edge are the same. The problem, really, what it comes down to is that the S6 itself, the main one, is such a divergence from the S5 that Samsung is still pushing the S6 as a design story, right? The main normal unfettered S6 still is going to feature all that design literature in its marketing, right? So
Right.
how do you differentiate? How do you sell the S6 Edge as a superior product? Especially when, from what I saw, the number of side panels, the utility of all those side panel features, as cute as the ability to, to assign a color to your mom and another color to your brother, so that when your phone is laying face down, who lays your phone face down? When your phone is laying face down
We
on a
don't want to scratch
table,
up that protruding camera.
well, so sure, scratch up your Gorilla Glass 4. That doesn't make sense to me. And as cute and as visually appealing as that feature is, the S6 Edge doesn't have enough differentiating features to make it worth that extra $100. So unless you're really design focused, and Samsung, like Apple did with the watch, brought a lot of fashion bloggers to this event. There were a
Okay.
lot more regular people at this event than tech bloggers, because they wanted to push that design story.
I think the price is the big issue. Like, it wouldn't be such a mind-boggling decision. It wouldn't be so infuriating, and you're like, why would they do it? It wouldn't seem so pointless if the price difference was negligible and they just said, we just made this one because, bigger people might want something different.
Yeah.
It's not. It's like, yeah, it's priced as though there's a significant advantage and there isn't. And I wonder how people in stores are going to be asked to address that when the Debbies and the Tims walk in and say, which one do I buy? What's the difference? Like, I wonder, are they going to be told to? I guess I wonder what their explanation will be, other than there's no difference. It's like, well, why is that one more expensive?
Exactly, it's pretty. But the sign says that both of them are pretty. Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess like one's more pretty. I think
Yeah.
what for the first few months, what's going to happen, um, and this Samsung admitted to me, is that people are going to walk into the store and say, "Hey, I saw this beautiful Edge display thing. I kind of want to buy it. Is it available?" And they'll go, "No, I'm sorry. We're out of stock. It's really hard to make these Edge displays. That's why we're only getting a couple of them every week. But we do have this beautiful brand new Galaxy S6 Edge, and guess what? It's $100 cheaper."
Right.
And people are going to go, "Whoa, yeah,
That will be the exact reaction.
metal."
People will
And
walk out of the store going, yeah.
it's like, finally, Galaxy S whatever is metal. Finally, it's got, I mean, for all the people who complain about the fact that it has no removable battery, that it has no
Oh,
SD card
whatever.
anymore, you
Get
have
with
to
the
praise
times.
you have to praise Samsung for taking a stand finally and being like, because I mean, I don't know if you saw the press conference feed. Um, I think it was like 6 a.m. your time, so maybe you didn't. But did you see it?
No, I didn't.
No. Okay. So just wanted to, yeah, make sure. Anyway, so what the guy saying? By the way, the press conference featured two female execs, um, which was awesome. It was so much more enjoyable and so much less embarrassing and so much shorter than any Galaxy S6 press conference I can remember. I keep saying
Galaxy S.
Galaxy S6, Galaxy S press conference I can remember. I honestly, I thought it was a completely different company. Like J.K. Shin, he said a joke that wasn't bad. It was actually a funny joke. He didn't spend a lot of time on stage because he knows that his English isn't very good. There was no like call and response where they hired some British theater guy to pretend that he knew about the product. There were actual Samsung executives on stage talking about products that they themselves had played a part in designing.
That's awesome.
So yeah, I thought it was so cool.
So,
Oh, sorry, I'm hearing an echo.
no.
I have to turn off my. There it is. Okay, I'm not sure what that What I'm using GarageBand, and sometimes I can like hear an echo of myself when I talk. Anyway, so other than the fact that the devices themselves aren't that dissimilar, I think Samsung taking a stand with the fact that we're going to charge more for products that can't have, don't have replaceable batteries, don't have SD cards. That's going to piss off a lot of people. We've already heard of it. Like,
If they could fit away, like if they could find a way to fit in like the UFS 2.0 or the blah, the new storage standard that they're using that has
UFS 2.0.
yeah. I have a problem saying UFS 2.0 with that like tripping over my tongue. Like if they could find a way to fit that into the the marketing materials, I feel like people wouldn't care that there was no SD.
No, I don't, because SD it's not for them it's not it's not speed, it's price, right? For most people who buy SD cards and store local data on them, it's the fact that I'm looking at the TELUS page here for the S6 and S6 Edge. There's $110 between each storage size, right? That's Apple's strategy. They've been doing it for years. The problem is that right now you can buy 32 gigs of storage for $25, right? So yes, it's significantly faster, but it's not nearly as convenient. Sorry, it's more convenient, but it's not nearly as convenient to have to shell out an extra $110 rather than going to Amazon and ordering a 32 gig storage card.
Do you think part of that is they don't still have 16 gig? Yeah, it's 32, 64, 128, right?
Exactly. And it's interesting that all three carriers, or most carriers from what I can tell, are offering all three storage sizes in both white and black.
In the UK, I think they're starting at 64 for the Edge.
Makes sense. And that makes sense to me because that's a way of differentiating the products, right?
Yeah, true.
But alas. So yeah, they're taking a stand and they're making it, they're saying that the batteries, despite being smaller, will last longer because they're more efficient. The chip inside the Galaxy S6s is more efficient. The ability to fast charge or wireless charge is a huge improvement. So there are tangible benefits to the idea of closing off the battery because it keeps the device thin. It's actually thinner than the iPhone 6. I don't think it's 6.8 millimeters, and I don't think they could have done that.
No, they couldn't.
By having a removable battery.
No.
So it was a matter of design over convenience, and that's going to annoy a lot of people, but it's also going to make the device significantly more attractive to a much wider group of people, a group of people that wouldn't have ever looked at the Galaxy S before because it wasn't attractive. Let's be honest, it hasn't really been an attractive device for quite a while.
Nope. What about
if
covers?
Ever.
How are covers going to work with the Edge?
So they do have a bunch of accessories, and I checked. They have some really interesting designs. I'm getting a shipment of them in a couple of weeks, so we'll see. But I didn't get to try many of them on. I do know that they have one Edge case that has a see-through cover. So even with it's kind of like the equivalent of the what was it called? The window cover for the S4 and S5, where you would have like a little window to see the incoming notifications.
Yeah.
They have an equivalent case for that, but it's translucent across the entire front. So it shows you the entire screen, but it also protects it, and it shows you the sides too.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how it'll work, but They
I
seem
feel
to be
like
pretty
anybody
happy
buying,
with
because
it.
well, given that we've already established that the only difference is that it looks prettier, and anybody buying the Edge is probably not going to be putting a case on it.
No, I don't know. I mean, a lot of people put cases on their phones, and they won't buy a case without won't buy a phone without a case. So I think as long as Samsung designed them properly, then I don't see a reason why they wouldn't sell in great number. And I mean, there's tons of other companies like Spec and Griffin and all these
Spigen,
and
yeah,
Spigen and
OtterBox.
OtterBox. They're all coming out with their own.
What else did you see? You saw Alcatel.
I saw Alcatel. Yeah, Alcatel is an interesting one. They launched their new hero device, actually what they call their first hero device. It's the Idol 3, and they're not the most advanced devices in terms of specs, but they ape the iPhone 6 sizes, and they're perfectly aware of that. But objectively speaking, they're not bad for the price, right?
Yeah.
They're under $300. There's a 4.7 and 5.5 inch version. They don't look like the iPhone. I mean, they're
Okay.
black squares or rectangles, and they kind of look like every other device, but they're symmetrical, and they're using that as a way to differentiate in their marketing.
Mm.
They have this upside down branding thing where you can use your phone in any orientation because there's a mic on both sides that can change directions and blah blah blah. But it's running a fairly stock version of Lollipop. They're running the bigger one, the 5.5-inch version, is running 64-bit octa-core Snapdragon 615 chip, 2
Right.
gigs of RAM, 16 gigs of internal storage. A huge battery, a decent camera. I
Micro
tried
SD.
it. Sorry,
Micro SD.
and micro SD, and it was a pretty impressive piece of hardware for under $300.
Yeah.
And Alcatel is really trying. I mean, they're a small brand, but they have a decent relationship with TELUS and Bell,
Mm.
and they're getting some good traction. They said that they're the number 5 global smartphone. They're number 5 in global smartphone shipments, and they're number 4 in Canada, like
Hmm.
overall, which is crazy.
That is crazy.
I don't know how they're tallying that, and I would really love to see some external numbers from from
Yeah.
IDC or one of these other analyst firms. But I believe them because they've been selling the crap out of their Pop Mini. It's a prepaid
Mm.
device. They have the Idol X Plus on TELUS.
Right.
They have the Idol 2S on Bell. They have a bunch of connected tablets. I mean, and none of them have been very good. You played with one,
Oh,
the
but
Idol X
they're
Plus.
yeah, I like that phone though.
It's well made.
Yeah, it's well made. And the thing is, you can go on about how, oh, you could just get like the OnePlus One for like a little bit more. And it's like people walking into a store and saying, I want to buy a smartphone that I can use Facebook on. Like they're not. If someone tells them, oh, you should just go online, you get an invite for this phone. Like it's people say that they're not worth the money for like the $300 or whatever they cost, but that's they're fairly priced for the average person walking in off the street and saying, I want to walk out with the phone today and I don't want to spend $600.
And for people who don't really know, it gives a good first impression, right? When you
Yeah.
look at a Samsung next to an Alcatel One Touch, and you're not looking at the S5 or high-end Samsung, but you're looking at like the Core LTE or a mid-range LG device next to an Alcatel.
Yeah.
You can argue that the Alcatel is actually better made. It's cheaper. If you're not worried about upgrades, because the Alcatel devices never receive upgrades, which is kind of unfortunate, but um, you're getting a decent experience, and
Yeah.
this device will actually push them, I think, into a whole new market because this Idol 3 doesn't just give a good impression, but it gives other high-end devices a run for the money.
Hmm.
It's definitely doing for carriers what the OnePlus One is doing for unlocked devices.
Ooh.
So it's going to come to it'll be $0 on contract or $300 outright, but most people don't buy their phones at a carrier outright. So
No.
they're hoping that this becomes the go-to $0 phone, and that you'll choose
Well,
it.
that's a harder market. That's a harder sell.
It is way harder because they still all these carriers like Bell and Telus still sell the S4.
I was just gonna say, well, do you want the Galaxy Alpha for $0? Like,
Yeah,
what
exactly. I mean,
happened?
that's really tough, right?
Like,
The fact that we buy our devices on contract, and they'd rather subsidize the products even more than lower the prices of their plans. That's what
hmm
these carriers have decided to do. I mean, I'm looking today on Telus' site. You can buy an iPhone 5S for $0, and
not a bad deal.
that's a big deal. So anyway, that's that. And we're getting our Galaxy S6 review unit very soon, and I'm really looking forward to playing with it because from one sense, it's a very similar experience. TouchWiz doesn't feel too different, but
Oh, they pulled it back.
they did, but I mean, it still doesn't feel very different. It still feels
Okay.
like TouchWiz, right? It's still
Okay.
got the capacitive buttons, but all the major nagging issues from the S6 or from the S5 seem to have been
Rectified, yeah.
rectified, eliminated in the S6. Let's move on to the Apple Watch. That's coming in a few days. I'm heading down to California soon, Sunday, to take a look at it for the Monday press conference. I'm super excited, and I think it'll be a barn burner.
Ooh.
I think people are going to go crazy for this thing.
Oh yeah.
And there's been a lot
Yeah.
of leaks recently about, especially like from 9 to 5 Mac,
hmm
on how Apple is going to market this product, how app developers have to build within the constraints of the SDK. You wrote about that today. So what do you
Yeah.
think? I mean, this is definitely not your Android Wear watch that you bought for $200, right? This is a
No.
completely different experience.
But what's interesting is that I think that I mean Bloomberg had that story on the guidelines that Apple has, and that's what both Apple and Google have guidelines. I don't know if there
Mm.
are certain guidelines that must be followed, but I think it's more a case that these things are strongly encouraged. So it'll be really interesting to see which apps actually follow that and which brands choose to ignore it. But I thought that the most interesting part was that some brands apparently are kind of holding back because they don't know how they can offer a better experience on the watch than they can on the phone.
Which
So
is
they're
not a
kind of
bad thing.
no, I think it's amazing. I think it's great, and it's the same in that all these guidelines from Apple and from Google exist because Google, no more than Apple, they don't want people using the watch and being like, oh, but I found myself staring at my watch all the time and I had to keep like poking at it, and it just wasn't a good experience because it was too complicated and the screen is too small and it just required too much engagement. They don't want you to think that about their watch, and how they do that is by encouraging people to make good apps, because all Google can do is provide like the baseline OS experience, and then it's up to the app developers are really going to define your experience on the device.
Right. So I also think that Apple is making it very obvious that not every notification that you get on your phone is going to be appropriate for the Apple
Yes.
Watch. And that's another level of intelligence that Android Wear just doesn't offer yet. Because while you can
No.
block an app entirely from coming onto your phone or from coming onto your watch, it doesn't allow that level of, like, if I only want to receive text from 3 people
Yeah.
but not from everybody, there's no way to do that
Yeah.
on
And
Android
it's
Wear
something
at
that
the
you see
moment.
on desktop apps all the time. Like Skype does it, where Skype will make that like bloop sound and bounce for the first message that you send me, but then subsequent messages after that, it's not gonna have that number isn't gonna go up on that little red flag, and it's not gonna bounce every time. It's not gonna make the noise every time. So I think these types of accessories can benefit from that level of I guess granularity when it comes to notifications, where I say I want you to alert me for the first time for every new contact. So if I get 10 messages from Daniel, I only want one notification. But if I get a message from someone else after those 10 messages, I want a second one.
Right, and
So
what's so interesting is that the only way that you can do that on Android Wear is to actually configure that in the Gmail app. So, for
yeah,
example, by default, it'll say it'll notify for every message is turned off, which means that if you haven't checked your phone for and you haven't actioned a notification for the first message, if you receive 8 messages after that, you won't actually receive notifications for them. If it's under
Mm,
the same, if it's in the same label or the same
right.
folder. So, if you divide all your emails into inbox, priority inbox, updates, forums,
Mm.
promotions, social, like Google tries to get you to do, uh, it depends on the label, but you can configure that on your phone, and that will translate to your watch. But there's nothing intelligent about, knowing who is sending you an email and whether or not that particular person should be conveyed to your watch in a.
Yeah, and that's something that you see, even as we said, Google tries to do that priority inbox and it tries itself to filter your important contacts, but it's not infallible and sometimes it gets stuff wrong. Sometimes I'll get an email from my doctor that gets filtered to updates and I'll say, oh, I needed to see that 2 days ago.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's one of those things. It's not a perfect system, and what people want or need is a perfect system because the only way to get there currently is massive amounts of configuration. And I had an ongoing discussion with one of the readers about the priority and none and the notifications, even just on Lollipop. And they were like, "But I don't get why everyone's so annoying. You can just turn that off. Like, why don't you just set to priority and then individually turn off permissions for each app to send you notifications?" So because I don't want to do that.
That's a ridiculous prospect.
That's
That
what
that
I was like, but I could do it before. And his argument and his logic was, it's called priority for a reason. Like you want only the people and apps that you give priority to be able to get through. So why can't you just turn them on and turn everything else off? I'm like, because I want everything off, except for
right, except
alarms.
for alarms.
Yeah.
So I need to tell you um, on the day we were supposed to leave, change your mind at the station. Um, on the day that Sunday morning, the day that all those press conferences happened, I set
You
my
did kill your
alarm
alarm.
for 7:15, 7:30, and 7:45 a.m. And then I went to sleep. And then I woke up at 11 a.m.
What?
Yeah, no kidding. Because
Because of none.
I had fallen to the none problem
The none
on,
problem
on
sucked.
my 1M8 because I'd flashed the Google Play Edition software, so there was no option. It was
Yeah, that
it was
when I
really
got the
annoying, I
Nexus
have to admit.
6 in December, do you remember that day that I overslept till like 11?
Oh, I sure do.
And I thought it was because I had changed from the next or from the HTC when I made the day before, like 5 p.m. Went to
Right.
sleep. Had it on none. Lollipop. Lollipop's great. Screw Kit Kat. I left that behind yesterday.
Yeah.
Had it on none because I like to have everything on silent and no vibrations because I have the watch to tell me when I have notifications now, and I have like a notification anyway. Not important. But yeah, put it on none. Woke up the next morning at 11 instead of 7:30.
Well, I mean, that's one of those features where Google thought they were being helpful by giving you
But it's
more.
so like
um, but
like,
it's a bad design decision
but I
because
don't understand. Like this is one of those issues where when a company does something and you're like, so many people had to think that that was a good idea before it got to me. Like so many people.
yeah, you're right, and I think it's because they're thinking like engineers and not like regular phone users,
Well,
right?
doesn't Google do like dog food within Google where they have like the normal people in HR use the phones before they release them?
Yeah, I mean, I think with 5.1 they are reverting back to the old behavior, right? But the
Well,
problem is,
I heard a really interesting rumor that they're gonna keep it as like non-priority and all, but none will have an option that says none except for alarms. Or no, it's none. Either way, it's like you can do it indefinitely or for an hour.
Mhm,
None will now have an option that's like disable all notifications until my next alarm.
until my next alarm.
So
Oh, that makes sense.
you'll need to
But I
still
think,
switch it on every day. But it's actually cool because I feel like a lot of
but that should
put
just be
their
the default behavior,
people
right?
put their phone on silent every day, like put on once, and then it stays on silent. I think for sometimes much longer than they intended to. So I think it might be helpful to have like a little reminder every day that hey, now you're awake, you're gonna have notifications,
Right.
and then you can be like, oh, I'm gonna turn those off again until tomorrow.
Yeah, and I think, but Google has to live with that failure, right? They have to acknowledge that
Someone
and
has to sleep at night.
I mean, it kind of it helps that only 3% of their audience is suffering through that indignity, but really, they made a mistake, and they need
Okay,
to
but
own up to it.
it's a whole other argument when you're like, it's such a relief that they can't get their shit together with the software rollout, so that so few people are having this problem.
Well, I know. I mean, that's really kind of, the sad thing, but it's almost the way that they roll out app updates, right? They do a a rolling update for all their apps,
Mm.
right? Because they want to test, or as well with OTA updates, right? They roll them out piecemeal to make sure that they don't
Yeah.
get everybody in trouble.
They brick a few phones first, and then they wait a week.
So anyway, I'm sure that they'll get it together and fix it, but
5.1, yeah.
it is what it is.
It's rough. There's a few
So
other bugs. I think that's the biggest one. I don't understand. Like this. I find it so like cathartic to just bitch about Lollipop sometimes. But anyway, the other thing that I hate about Lollipop while we're here is
I wrote a great article about it with your Nexus 6 after 2 months update.
I didn't get to go into as much about Lollipop as I wanted to, but
Well,
it's okay.
feel free
But
to bitch about it anytime you want.
I don't understand why when I say, hey, I don't want private data to show up on my notifications on those banners that pop up my lock screen. I'm like, oh, I don't want that. I don't know why they have to say like content hidden. Like, I don't know why they can't just go back. Like, why do they need the banner at all then? Why?
Yeah, I think that's
It's just bad design.
that looks like an API issue. I remember I sat in a session at Google I/O last year where they were explaining the design of that,
Yeah.
and
I was there, I think, yeah.
I think, oh yeah, you were there. But I also think that developers can prevent that from hitting the lock screen. They just have to set a flag inside the app, and not all of them do that.
Hardly
So
any of
I
them
think
do.
well, yeah, exactly. So that is unfortunate. But I mean, again, like it's probably the biggest update to Android in 4 years,
Yeah.
right? Since Ice Cream Sandwich. So there's inevitably going to be some problems. And
Yeah.
I mean, I like Lollipop. Other than
Oh,
the alarms problem, I really
that's
haven't
why
had
it fits me. I like Lollipop. It's just disappointing.
Yeah, I agree. What else is
Actually,
disappointing? What else do we hate right now?
I remember my sister was visiting Toronto, and it's interesting to get her perspective because I got her onto the Nexus 5 when it first came out, and she had switched from an iPhone. And to hear her rage when she texts me, when she talks to me about Lollipop, like one, she doesn't understand why her battery. She's more IT than I guess consumer tech, so she doesn't understand why her battery life sucks now. She's like, why does it take a minute and a half for my phone to turn on when it didn't before? I'm like, that's a super good question. Or how she can't turn off her silent mode, how it takes too long to boot up, how there's so many different things that she rages about where she's like, I don't understand why it does this, and I wish they hadn't changed it. How can I go back? I'm like, ooh.
Well, that's really interesting because it shouldn't take longer because the Nexus 5 isn't encrypted. It doesn't. When you upgrade to Lollipop, it doesn't encrypt. It's only encrypting.
No, yeah, it's only it's not even by default anymore, but
exactly, it was only for newer devices like the Nexus 6 that shipped with Lollipop. So it's probably just that it's just not a very efficient update, and that there's a lot more to it than there was with KitKat.
But yeah, what else do we hate? How was that HTC band? Did you hate that?
Oh yeah,
Oh,
I
really?
hated it. It was bad, but I mean, to be fair, it was a very, very early prototype. But my God, is that thing ugly and uncomfortable.
And it's Under Armour too, which is like that stuff is not supposed to be ugly or uncomfortable.
HTC had built it. Apparently, Under Armour did not have any input in the design. They said that well, I mean, HTC said that Under Armour would have a more active role in the design of future iterations of the grip, but this version they had none.
God.
And they also made these excuses about what it couldn't do, right? So it has no heart rate monitor because none of the heart rate monitors out there are reliable. Well, tell that to my Basis Peak because the Basis Peak has an amazing, accurate heart rate monitor that is 24/7.
Yeah. Can't do anything else, but it can do that.
Exactly. And things like it it has GPS, obviously, but it doesn't really have a lot of kind of smartwatchy features. It's very much aimed at hardcore athletes, so I think it's going to be a very niche product.
Like the
Um,
Garmin's and stuff.
yeah, but I think that's really what they're trying to do is they're just trying to poke their feet into the water and see if
Mm.
it's warm. Um, there's nothing essential about the product. I don't think anybody's going to go, oh, the HTC Grip is, a better product than anything from Epson or Garmin or TomTom. But it's
Mm.
just going to be one of those alternatives, at least for the first generation.
Which is, oh, I feel like
And
it's
they,
more damaging. Like it's one of those things that's like they just need to have some skin in the game, so they put something out there that even at the launch event they're like the next version will be a lot nicer.
yeah, but they also said that they don't even know when it's going to go on sale,
Mm.
so it may be a better product. I always hedge that, right? I always hedge when I
But when
use
you see
these
something
early
early, I feel like it's
prototypes.
only fair to be like, hey, they have time to fix it if they want to.
And they requested our feedback, and who knows if they're going to take it and run with it. I hope so, but you never know.
Um, what else? What else happened this week? Ooh, Spectrum auction.
That I think is what we're going to end up talking about, end the podcast talking about. So Spectrum auction, Wind, the big winner here. They
Mm.
spent just $56 million, basically the minimum amount, um, for 30 megahertz of spectrum in Southern Ontario, Alberta, and British Columbia.
Okay.
So the way it works is that it's generally based on these regions are divided into population. British Columbia and Alberta are single regions, so you bid on an entire province in those cases.
Okay.
But Eastern Ontario, Southern Ontario, and Northern Ontario are divided into three separate blocks,
Okay.
which never really made sense to me
Mm.
because Ontario may be a far bigger landmass, but in terms of population, it's not. I guess it is. I was going to say it's not
I don't have an idea. I
double the
don't know.
size of the population of BC, but I'd have to double check that. Um, anyway, so Alberta, Wind and Mobilicity currently operate in Calgary and Edmonton. They currently
Mhm.
operate in Vancouver. So Mobilicity, as I wrote yesterday, didn't get their stuff together in time. They lost their funding.
What
So
happened?
so I mean, it just seems like their creditors couldn't agree. They have so many different people who have a stake in the game that they couldn't get an agreement together to bid, some crazy amount of money, right? They had an agreement by the court that would allow them up to $200 million in financing, but that
Mm.
didn't actually guarantee them the financing. It just
Just
agreed
so that they
that
were
they
allowed
could
to,
get
yeah.
it if somebody would be willing to give it to them, and clearly nobody was.
Bummer. And
Um,
that's one of the things that I think a lot of people win that because those headlines came out a few weeks ago about how they had kind of court approval to go ahead with that. And I think a lot of people misconstrued it as that they were going to bid. And maybe that's because Mobilicity made it sound like in their application that, it was all hunky dory and that they were going to get the funding, but
I
they were
don't
never
ever think
guaranteed the funding for participation.
right. Yeah, and I also think that everybody knew internally that they weren't going to get it. I think they wanted it to seem like they were because they're on, they're just desperate and they don't want their customers to leave, and that's kind of the reality for Mobilicity is that they're hanging by a thread.
But what's going to happen now? Like, what are their options?
Well, I mean,
Like network stuff?
they're in core protection for a while longer. They're probably going to.
Like, if I'm a Mobilicity customer, what should I be thinking now? What advice would you give me?
Well, I would tell you to leave. Just objectively get out while you can. But Mobilicity itself wants to appeal to the courts, the federal courts, to allow TELUS to buy its spectrum, right?
Right.
Because the Industry Canada won't allow TELUS to buy Mobilicity spectrum based on the spectrum transfer rules. But what they can do is they can appeal through a bunch of kind of exceptions in the Competition Act that say that this is unfair and we want to appeal this. The Industry Canada would still have to approve it, and they probably won't. But at least the negotiations would take place behind closed doors, and I think that's what
Yeah.
Mobilicity wants. Is they don't want it to be a public discourse, because if they
Yeah.
apply to the CRTC, they have to make all that documentation public.
Mm.
If they sue and they take it behind, they take it into a court, they can have these negotiations with the government and TELUS privately.
Yeah.
So
So
nothing's going to happen as far as I know, but
okay.
it's a
So
nice.
everyone else, Wind has got a whole bunch of new stuff, but they're not going to be able to do anything with it for like a year.
Well, okay, so the thing that Wind customers have to realize is that the AWS-3 auction in the US just ended like 2 weeks ago, and that took a very long time because it was a different auction type to this one, and anybody who wanted to up the bid could do it, and it was a silent bid, so they had to wait until there was a certain allotment of time that had passed since the last bid to close that particular region. And because the U.S. is such a huge market, these companies just kept bidding and bidding and bidding, and they put in like 50 bids for each region. So that's finally done. So the AWS-3 spec is also finalized, but nobody can actually use it because there are no handsets that support it.
Yes.
And there are so many links in the chain when a new frequency is finalized. They have to talk to the 3GGP or 3GGP or 3GPP rather. That's the organization that finalizes the technical specs for all the new bands. They have to figure out what band it'll be in. They have to figure out whether it'll be interoperable with AWS 1. And then companies like Qualcomm then have to take that final spec and develop basebands that support it, along with antennas that can work interoperably and concurrently with AWS 1. And then a company like Samsung has to then buy that baseband chip and implement it in their phones. And then the companies like Wind have to buy the equipment on the towers and the antennas to roll out that AWS-3. So there's so many links in the chain, and nobody really knows how long it's going to take. It could take 6 months, but most likely it'll take 18 months to 24 months. So I spoke to Tony Lacavera today, and he told me that bare minimum we're looking at Q1 2016 for an early rollout that takes advantage of AWS-3.
Okay.
But in the meantime, now that they have all this extra spectrum, they can refarm part of their 3G network in the interim and roll out LTE in at least one market, which is Southern Ontario, because they have 20 megahertz in Southern Ontario, but they only have 10 megahertz in British Columbia and Alberta. So they can't actually do anything without essentially shutting off their existing network in those two regions. But they can refarm 10 megahertz right now in Southern Ontario and launch LTE on that network, and then use AWS-3 eventually as fallback when it does launch with newer devices. But in the meantime, what they're trying to do is they're trying to, after the 2500 megahertz spectrum auction is finished in the beginning of April, they're going to try to acquire more AWS-1 spectrum from Mobilicity, which really would be the best course of action for them.
Yeah.
That's kind of their thinking. Do they roll out LTE piecemeal in certain markets, or do they wait until everything is finished and there are handsets in market that will allow them to at least support a bigger LTE network in all of their regions, in all of their markets, on a select number of handsets?
It's interesting because the same thing kind of went down in the UK when they had their kind of LTE spectrum auction, and the auction wasn't going to happen until, let's say, September, or March, I think. But in the previous September, Everything Everywhere, which is Orange and T-Mobile, applied to, I guess, the UK's version of the CRTC and said, hey, do you think it will be okay if we use some of our 3G spectrum as and repurposed it? And they
Hmm.
were like, by all means, go ahead. And the bigger carriers couldn't do that because they needed all of their 3G spectrum for that. So, and they filed anti competition suits, and they tried to stop it. But the end result was, even though the LTE was only live in a few towns around the UK, they were still the nation's first, and
Hmm.
it was still progress, right? And I think for wind, that will be a similar situation where I think it might be more beneficial for them to be showing progress as opposed to, because they've been pointing to this spectrum auction for so long as this is what we need to get. We need to get the money for additional spectrum, and then everything will be okay. And I think if they then turn around and say, okay, but it's going to take a while, it's going to take until next year, you know, you're basically asking for two favors when you've already asked for one.
So Lacavera said something very interesting. He said that now that he has obtained all the spectrum, investors or potential investors no longer see the company as a bad investment
Hmm,
because the spectrum that they hold is extremely valuable. It's
interesting.
one of the most valuable assets that a telco
Yeah.
can have. So now it's going to be a lot easier for them to invest in existing infrastructure. So, for example, Wind has a problem with coverage. They have a lot of spectrum in Ontario, but they don't have a lot of coverage because they don't have a lot of towers. Because that capex, that capital expenditure, has been very slow because they didn't have a lot of money to invest in existing infrastructure. Right? It's one
Right.
thing to invest in buying more spectrum. It's another thing to use the existing spectrum you have more efficiently by putting up more towers, so that if you have a tower that say points, if you have a single tower that points in a 90 degree uh, in a 90 degree sort of direction,
Mm-hmm.
that means that the power that they can push the antenna to is less than if they were to have two antennas pointing in two 45-degree directions, right? It's a more
Yeah.
targeted, focused signal that
Yeah.
there will therefore be a lot stronger.
Right.
Now that they have a bit more money, they can invest in that existing infrastructure. So Wind is probably going to have an improvement in its 3G service in the run up to LTE. And then once they launch LTE, they can then merely upgrade the software in their existing backhaul to support LTE. So it's an
Right.
investment in two ways.
So I wonder, I mean, I'm wondering when the marketing will start, and I wonder how they're going to push it.
Well,
Because
the other thing that we need to focus on is that the CRTC is still going to they're still going to regulate or make a decision on whether they're going to regulate domestic roaming, which means that
mm,
potentially Wind could have access to Rogers, Bell, and Teles's 3G networks at really low costs. So the places in the country that they don't have coverage, they may be able to offer an unlimited nationwide 3G plan
right,
for not a whole lot of money. And that could be big for the company too.
and that's easy. That's one of the things that I feel like that's a lot easier to to explain to the average customer than like those roaming rates are easier to explain to the customer, and the benefit is easier. It's easier to translate into layman's terms than when you talk about upgrading their infrastructure and upgrading and the knock-on effect it will eventually have, and the
Yeah, but it's
increased
also
support from investors and that kind of stuff.
it's also not easy to tell people to wait.
That's what I mean. So I'm saying that, when you're telling someone to wait, you have to give them a good reason to wait, and you shouldn't need like 300 words of fine print to tell them why.
Exactly. So
So it'll be interesting.
definitely interesting. Um, let's sort of conclude there. I think we're we're in a really good position right now. There's some fantastic devices on the horizon. There's some really interesting sort of network news. Canada is finally has this. The AWS 3 Spectrum auction was the final step towards getting LTE in every province, essentially, with a fourth
Mm,
carrier, because SaskTel, MTS, Eastlink, they already have LTE networks in their respective provinces. So now we have an opportunity for a fourth LTE provider in British Columbia, Alberta, and Southern Ontario. The only thing that didn't happen was that Wind didn't get Ottawa, and Ottawa is a big market for them. It's around 5% of their existing user base. So Videotron got the Eastern Ontario block for AWS3, which is troubling.
And Videotron also got like a whole bunch in Quebec too.
Well, they obviously were going to get that, but it seems like the only really challenging market was Eastern Ontario. We don't know how
Very
much
different to the U.S. auction, which was 50 bids back and forth over a long period of time. Where here it was almost very simple.
Well, it was. I mean, it was like a 3-day auction.
Yeah, it's like very Canadian. Everybody queues up, and then it's like, this bit's for you. This is your piece. This is your piece, and then there was a minor scrap in the corner, and then it was over.
Yeah, I think the 700 megahertz auction was a little bit more like the U.S. auction that just took place. So next week we're going to have Tom Emmerich on.
Yay!
And he is our wearables expert, and he's going to chat with us about the Apple Watch. By then we'll probably know when it'll be released in Canada, how much the Apple Watch itself and the Watch Edition will be. And
all your money on your firstborn.
Exactly. And we'll know everything we need to know about it, and hopefully we will have our first impressions up by then. So thank you so much for listening. Sorry for no pod last week. I was in transit, so was Douglas, and
we're all just super busy and overloaded with announcements. So,
but if you haven't checked out the site in the last week, there has been some fantastic coverage by everybody, and I got to play with some very, very cool technology. So look at the news archives, look at the features, and read up on what you missed. So thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for all the wonderful news from Barcelona.
Oh, Barcelona. It was my great pleasure. We will talk to you next week. Bye.